For centuries, churches and chapels of various sizes, stylistic features, and purposes have been built in Bagnol and Barbat. Most of them were constructed in late antiquity, from the end of the 5th to the 7th century, and in the High Middle Ages, from the 12th to the 14th century. The erection of churches initially testified to the acceptance of Christianity and later to the spread of certain political powers and the saintly cults associated with them. It gives evidence of plagues like the Black Death or the spread of special forms of veneration that followed the example of particular saints. All these saintly cults reached Rab by sea on ships carrying priests, warriors, merchants, and travelers. The churches along the coast were navigational landmarks for sailors and fishermen, marking places of safe landing. The Church of St. John de Lenon is mentioned in records from 1373, although it is likely older than that. In 1505, it was described as a church located in the area of Obdenča, which is the old name for today's Vodenča, and already in the records from 1841, it was described as a ruin. In older descriptions of the Church of St. John, it was often said to be located near the tower Černota, on the site of today's Kaštel, which was named after this fortress. The local noble family Černota, who were originally from Trogir, were given land in Barbat in 1367. When the threat of Turkish pirates arose, Krste Crnota erected a tower, and probably the walls around it, so that he could protect his cattle and the local peasants. The fort was managed by a castellan, and over time, that title was transformed into a surname. It is assumed that this structure is partly preserved in the walls of today's homes in the Kaštel. Not far from St. John's, there was the Church of St. James, near what we call Grci today. It was first mentioned in 1494. Records from 1717 show the bishop ordered that the roof be repaired and that a painting be placed above the altar. This is also the last mention of this church. In the 1940s, the entire apse still remained standing. The church belonged to the monastery of St. Stephen and was located on its estates in Pasturan. Near the former houses of the Miknic family below Kanat, there used to be the Church of St. Mark from the Venetian era. In contrast, the Church of St. Martin in Valmartin dates from the 9th century, when, with the arrival of the Franks under Charlemagne, spreads the cult of St. Martin along the Adriatic. In the 13th century, a number of prominent citizens of Rab, descendants of the church's patrons, had the right to appoint chaplains. A document from 1237 mentions some of them who, according to the custom of the time, had interesting surnames. Cristofor Maldenaro, bad money. Cristo Gambi Grosse, big legs. Ginan Dragobrat, dear brother. Stjepan Skoro Bogati, nearly rich. Kotopanja Vitin Velike Glave, big head. Behind Pudarica towards Mišjak was the Church of St. Mary, and the Church of St. Rocco, of which no trace remains, stood somewhere on the route of the main road. Finally, in Barbat, there was also the Church of St. Barbat, after which the place was named. The church was first mentioned in 1523, but it was certainly older, perhaps even dating to the 9th century. It was abandoned as early as 1760, and in 1826, it was razed.